Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A Livestream number 104, being recorded on August 19, 2023. It's a Saturday. We're joined at twitch.tv/socialismS4A by 35 people in the live chat. And today, I do have some articles pulled. I think mostly we're going to be chatting. I'm going to respond to some comments. We're going to talk about what's new on the channel, what's coming up on the channel. Little bit of this and that, but I'm not going real heavy on the agenda today, so we're just gonna, a bit of a free-for-all, but with a few guideposts for me to come back to, I guess. I feel like I'm kind of losing people on the AI stuff, which is why I didn't talk about it at all in the last stream. I do have one long piece about that, yeah, we'll see, if there's a big chunk of time and nobody has anything to say, maybe I'll read something from that. Otherwise, I have some comments from the YouTube channel. Sometimes, a lot of times I respond to the comments on the YouTube channel. Sometimes there are comments that I just don't feel like I can respond to as well as I would like in text. So I did pull a bunch of comments that I can sort of like have more of a discussion of in the stream today. I realize actually, so when you moderate the YouTube comments, you can put different settings, and one of them is comments I have responded to or haven't responded to. And YouTube counts responses as even if you hit the love button. So, a lot of people, you probably know if you've been commenting on the channel for a while, I quote love a lot of comments. You'll get the seal of approval from the YouTube channel. That is my way of kind of getting rid of the comment. I mean, not getting rid of in a bad way. It's like, I liked your comment, it was good, I found nothing offensive, or not just offensive, but that I needed to, sort of push back on, or anything like that. It's just like, yep, good comment, just sort of moving down the assembly line of comments kind of thing. So that's why I do that, is to sort of clear it out, because I like to keep the comments that make me think, not necessarily in a good way. Like, sometimes there's comments where it's like, wow, I never thought of that. Thank you for making me think of that. Then sometimes there's comments where I know it's wrong, but I've never really articulated why it's wrong before. And so I have to spend sometimes a couple of weeks really thinking about how to most constructively approach this comment. You know what I mean? Whereas if I just give it a knee-jerk reaction, which I really try not to do, if I give it a knee-jerk reaction in the comments, it's just going to be like, shut up, or, you know what I mean? That's not necessarily constructive, or just what are you kidding me? But I try to actually challenge myself to, explain why it's wrong. Sometimes it takes months, because keep in mind, that's not always the highest priority. I'm doing a lot of other things as well, not necessarily just thinking about one comment, but sometimes they do stick in my mind, and then sometimes I do come back to them later. Now, I don't know if there's tons of great examples of that in today's comments, but I did go through some of the outstanding comments, and some of them I just never, I leave up, I published the comment, I cleared it to appear on the channel, but I didn't especially agree with it, but I didn't disagree with it enough to not publish it. So there's some of those, and I was just going through all this for a couple hours yesterday and just looking at the backlog of 11 months of comments that have just been sitting there without a response from me. And so we'll look at some of that. I did pull some of them to read into the stream today. Sometimes it's people will make a comment that's 90% good, but then there's 10% that reflects, I think, a really sort of wrong line of thinking, to the point where I'd like to say something about it. But anyway, again, tact is important, and whatever else. So, what else are we doing? Yeah, we're going to do what's new on the channel, as always, what's coming up on the channel, and actually have more specific stuff than usual regarding what is coming up on the channel, so stick around for that. We'll do a BioBot update. We have a little thing from Itagen, who also has a YouTube channel out of Italy, about what the Italian neo-fascist government is doing. And yeah, that's some of the stuff that we pulled. But you know, tons of interesting stuff comes up in the course of a stream. There's also a lot of stuff I've been reading, but haven't necessarily pulled articles for. But it is on my mind. For example, well, we've got another Thin Blue Lies episode coming up. As you may know, I recorded a couple of episodes of the Thin Blue Lies podcast with Sal. That's a true crime podcast about crimes of the police. Actually, we were working for a couple of months on research for a show about police who are serial killers. Not like cops who kill a lot of people in the line of duty, but like serial killers who turned out to be cops as their profession. And there's actually a surprising amount. And we were working on that for quite a while. Things like the East Area Rapist, who later became the Golden State Killer, also was the original Night Stalker. Guy had like a series of different crimes. And it turns out there's a lot of serial killers who are cops. And so that we were working on and working on, and it was getting incredibly dark because there's a lot written about the East Area Rapist and Golden State Killer in particular, and it was just kind of getting to me. So we kind of put that on pause, and then we have another show that's going to be coming up, which is about gladiator fights in prisons. So this is a thing that's been going on for a while, but it's been cropping back up again, and there are various things written about it. So we're going to probably do a show about that. So that's coming up. We've only done, I think there's like 3 or 4 episodes. So yeah, but that'll be coming up soon. And I'm announcing that on the stream to sort of put myself on the hook for that, because we really had thought that the serial killer cop thing, which was my idea, like, you know, sometimes she suggests ideas, sometimes I do. That was my idea because I remember when the Golden State Killer was finally caught, most prolific serial killer in the history of California, and it turned out to be a cop. This guy had also done a lot of burglaries, and he turned out to have been a former burglary cop, specifically. So he was both burglar and burglary cop. And I thought, oh, well, that would kind of fit in with the thing, let's do that. And then I sort of led us, mea culpa, I led us on a several month thing of not getting a show done because there was so much to read, and then I wound up crapping out on it. But we will pick that up again, and probably before that comes out, we'll be doing another thing on the gladiator fights. If anybody's seen whatever was that season of Riverdale where Archie's in the fight club in the prison, yeah, that actually that actually happens. So anyway, and by the way, I don't recommend Riverdale. That is one of, people were like, that show, it's like Twin Peaks meets like, Saved by the Bell or something. And wow, that is an awful show. And then I wound up like hate watching it, just, sometimes I'll just do like paperwork or stuff that doesn't, require my full attention, and I'll put on shit in the background to just sort of have on. And that became like one of my preferred hate watch shows. It is awful, like awful. Piercingly, punishingly awful. Anyway, but Riverdale tie-in, what can I say? All right, where were we? Yeah, I think that's about everything. So before we launch into anything else, that's my opening rambling as we sort of find our stride here. Let's thank the patrons. Getting that up on the screen right now. Patreon.com/socialism for all. If you'd like to get your name on the screen. Oh, and that's July. My bad. Whoops. Anyway, that's out of date. But anyway, thanks to the patrons, most of whom are still supporting in August. And then we do have a few new names. And we finally did get our first blue name, Reverend Lawn Gnome Hollywood, who has been supporting for just hit 3 years, August 2020 to August 2023 so far. I think purple is going to be the next color, but that's going to be a year off. Anyway, thanks to the patrons. Really wish that was up to date, but that's my fault. Anyway, yeah, and I'd also like to say thanks in general to, we'll get that off the screen for a minute. There we go. I'd also like to say thanks in general to the community around this channel. And I say this as a message of appreciation because we don't have power yet. This is a study community. I get that people are all going off in different directions as far as, there are major turning points in the history of 20th century Marxism. Some people are anti-Leninist. They're sort of orthodox Marxist or left-com or something. And so they reject Marxism-Leninism and everything to do with what we would call communism today, as far as, the Comintern and Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Luxembourg, everything sort of having to do with that. There's also people who accept Lenin, at least nominally, and then reject Stalin, like Trotskyists, for example. There are people who at least see some good in Mao, but then think that the Chinese Revolution sort of went on the wrong course at some point. There are people who, I think the overwhelming consensus is that the USSR went revisionist after Stalin. Some people really continued to support it anyway. Some people feel that the, quote, opening up and restoration of capitalism, at least in a limited sense in China in the late 70s, really part of the global neoliberal turn. Some people feel that that was in line with an overall long-term strategy of building socialism. Others feel that it was revisionist. And a lot of people around this channel, my point is that there's a lot of forks in the road as far as major questions of what is actually sticking to the path of building socialism and fighting capitalism and imperialism, and what isn't. And a lot of people around this channel have only really been communist for a few years, and they're starting to study and they're starting to do the reading, and that includes me. I considered myself on the left for a long time, basically going back like over 20 years. But for a while I really didn't know what that meant, hadn't done any of the reading. I knew what it meant generally, but I didn't really know much about the overall history of the world communist movement, and I had not really seriously studied anything, and I just got involved in the US left without any sort of grounding in that, and you sort of get knocked around in the waves of like anarchists and SOCDEMs, but very few actual communists. I think now, 15 years after 2008, global financial meltdown, massive general crisis of capitalism, I think we're definitely on the precipice of that happening again within the next couple of years. We do seem to be approaching a sort of collapse stage of capitalism, which has been discussed all the way back to Marx, and which makes socialism a historic necessity. Capitalism just literally cannot go on forever, and we must organize to end it and to build a world after capitalism, because it itself trends towards instability and collapse, and that is starting to get really, really pronounced at this point. So there's a lot of people who have only been studying communism and trying to form opinions for just a couple of years about major questions, and they're trying to do this even without the benefit of a solid communist party. They might be in kind of a revisionist party, because that's mostly all that you find these days, but there's not a ton of guidance, so people are kind of reforming the study group kind of thing. YouTube channels, different things are happening, and people are trying to make sense of, what happened in the 20th century, even the 19th century, and what's happening now. What do we support? What don't we support? Where do we go from here? And my point is that none of us, like in the United States, for example, that partake in these communities and these discussions, really has power yet. So it's safe for us to make mistakes, because nothing's really at stake. We're still learning. This is a study community. There are other study communities. And I think that people get into all numbers of really heated arguments about that, particularly online, particularly if we spend too much time online and sort of forget to touch grass and lose perspective and stuff. Also, if you're a communist, it's probably because you care deeply about social change and people, and watching all the things, the ecocide, the war, just all of these things, it's traumatizing, and I've talked to comrades that have said, they're involved in what they're doing, because they're so upset about everything. It's just like they're crying every day. It's just so devastating to witness everything that's going on. So there's a lot of people who care deeply and are very angry about what's going on in the world, and getting into the communist movement and again trying to make sense of it and find your place in it in 2023 in the society that you're in the particular position within world events that you find yourself. And what are your tasks? What's your course of action? What are your opinions on past historical events? These are difficult questions, is the point. And people arrive at sort of different conclusions temporarily. As we are still studying, a lot of people change their positions, from one year to the next, until you eventually gather enough. If you're really committed to the studies, gather enough actual information and knowledge to keep going with it, keep refining your position, challenging yourself, engaging in dialogue with other people who say, I hear you saying that, but have you considered this? And then they give you a link and you're like, oh, I didn't know that. So my point is, communism is also all about criticism, ruthless criticism of all that exists. Now, that criticism should have a point to it. It shouldn't just be criticism for the sake of criticism, because that gets really irritating. But the point is, this is, a community that tries to be scientific and that thinks critically about social issues, social change, and history. And, there's a lot of arguments. It's very prone to conflict. Also, people who have adopted a revolutionary outlook are people who have accepted that some amount of conflict is sort of, necessary for radical social change. So there's a lot of ingredients there that set things up to be, somewhat turbulent. But I want to just take a minute here. This whole speech is basically about, we at this stage are students and learning and trying to build up the class consciousness and really the basis for launching another serious offensive of the class struggle. There are still things that have to come into effect before that's really going to be a thing. The labor movement needs to be rebuilt. We see some early stages of that, but it is still really in the early stages. Once the labor movement is built and people start gaining class consciousness that way, I think we'll see a revival of the parallel struggle for conquest of political power. But right now, we're still kind of in these sort of dregs of all of the various left parties that can't really get their numbers up. None of this has cohered yet into a nationwide or even international full-on class struggle. So there's actually there's a quote from Lenin, and I was just talking about this in the piece that I posted this morning, which is Articles for Robochia Gazeta. And it's from 1899. It's a lot of the same strains of thought that went into Lenin's What Is to Be Done a few years later. But anyway, I'd like to read this Lenin quote from that piece that was just posted. Quote, "We are all agreed that our task is the organization of the proletarian class struggle. But what is this class struggle? When the workers of a single factory or a single branch of industry engage in struggle against their employers, is this class struggle? No, this is only a weak embryo of it. The struggle of the workers becomes a full-on class struggle only when all the foremost representatives of the entire working class of the whole country are conscious of themselves as a single working class, and they launch a struggle that's directed not against individual employers, but against the entire class of capitalists and against the government which supports that class and serves that class. Only when the individual worker realizes that he is a member of the entire working class, and so this necessarily precludes, I'm just commenting here, necessarily precludes kind of divisive bigotries, anti-LGBTQ plus sentiment, sexism, religious prejudices, ethnic prejudices, ableism. Your consciousness of yourself as part of the overall working class means mentally you have that sense of unity with all the people in a class struggle, not sort of being chauvinistic about one section of it over others. And that goes for nationalism as well. And it's the class struggle is appreciates where you're at nationally, but is also internationalist in that you're not putting your own nation above others. Anyway, continuing. Only when the individual worker realizes that he is a member of the entire working class, only when he recognizes the fact that his petty day-to-day struggle against individual employers and individual government officials is a struggle against the entire bourgeoisie and the entire government, does that struggle become a class struggle. From the Communist Manifesto, quote, "Every class struggle is a political struggle." These famous words of Marx are not to be understood that any struggle of workers against employers must always be a political struggle. Because commenting, let's say you're organizing in a fast food chain right now in 2023. It's not necessarily really a grand scale political struggle. So you can have small forms of the class struggle which are not political. But the point is when it becomes really big and consolidated, as the struggle of the working class and things are in step with that, that's when it starts becoming a political struggle as well. But again, the political struggle working backwards, if you try to just do the political struggle, and you see all these kind of grifters that are just, trying to have all these opinions about what's going on in the left and this and that. Well, without the overall class struggle, that political struggle is necessarily going to be just dominated by people trying to sell books and get, media time on cable TV and all that kind of stuff. It's not going to be really representative or tied in with any broader class struggle. It's going to be sort of a PR stunt and spectacle. Anyway, continuing. They must be understood, the words "every class struggle is a political struggle," to mean that the struggle of the workers against the capitalists inevitably becomes a political struggle insofar as it becomes a class struggle. So you have a workplace struggle, and is that alone the class struggle, with a capital C? No, not until it takes on more of this unified dimension with workers all over the place. It is the task of the Social Democrats, which is what they called Marxists then, by organizing the workers, by conducting propaganda and agitation among them, to turn their spontaneous struggle against their oppressors into the struggle of the whole class, into the struggle of a definite political party for definite political and socialist ideals. This is something that cannot be achieved by local activity alone. That's the end of the quote. So a lot of the pieces, and if you've read What Is to Be Done, you'll recognize some of these themes, where Lenin is calling for the sort of what he called like local amateurism. Not that that's bad, but it can't stay on that level of just being sort of isolated, local, somewhat amateurish struggles. It's got to cohere into something bigger and take on a new character, and that's how it actually becomes a class struggle, which unifies the shop floor struggles with the political struggle and so on. So anyway, coming back to what I was saying, my appreciation of all the people who have put a toe into the water, trying to actually learn this stuff, become a communist and fight, and try to amplify and intensify the prospects of class struggle. You've probably gotten into many arguments that have really pissed you off. I know I have. And I think it's time that we just take a moment to step back and, despite all the arguments which to some extent are unavoidable, obviously, using the best social skills that we can find and compassion, we can maybe keep the nastiness to a minimum. Sometimes it's hard, I know, but there is an appreciation underneath it, and hopefully we can bring that out to the fore a bit more to recognize that, if you've made it this far, you're at least somewhat interested. That is, at least you're, unless you're deliberately, either some sort of disinformation agent or disruptor, or you're coming in with an extremely closed mind and you really are just fighting to hold on to your chauvinisms and more backward thinking while calling yourself a communist, and you're really not listening to people. But even people who are doing self-crit and who are open to revising their ideas with new information, not in a revisionist way, but like, okay, so you come in not understanding everything about communism. So you have to update and revise your understanding as you go in accordance with actually established principles of communism, which we're not born knowing. You do have to actually study them, just like any other science. So, if we can take a moment, look around, shake hands with the person next to you, and say, well, at least you got this far. People do get very caught up in some of the, not necessarily sectarian things. Sectarianism is when you're not working with people with whom you do not have a fundamental conflict of interest. In other words, when you're not working with people who you really should be working with. So opposing opportunism, for example, where you're shifting your politics around and working with people like the bourgeoisie, where there is a fundamental conflict of interest, class collaborationism, basically. No, opposing opportunism is not sectarian. But it is sectarian to sort of nitpick stuff that is not fundamental conflicts, and you really should be finding ways to work with people. But I say this all because I really do appreciate the community around this channel and the overwhelming majority of the people that I have encountered. We may have disagreements, and some of these are really about points of opposing real opportunism and revisionism, and that is important. I just hope that we can conduct it in a way that people can continue to learn and update their positions and stay open-minded on things, while presenting the best science, the best evidence that they can to represent their positions, and to actually back down and acknowledge when your position or the position you're representing or are trying to uphold really isn't supported by the evidence, and that you can admit that. And it takes a certain amount of being a big person and to be able to overcome that and update your position with the evidence, because that's, again, this is science in the end. We want to see change, and we want to do it in a way that actually works, because ending capitalism really is the point. So again, none of us is in power. This is a study community, and I appreciate that people have made it this far. It is a bit rough and tumble, but I'm glad that we are here doing this thing.